Hi, this is Dr. John Grazel, and this is a short video to share with you, hopefully, maybe as a resource, an effort we've been engaged in to try to develop a way of orienting students from the very beginning of their education to have an peace study orientation without necessarily having to become specialists in peace per se. Uh, and how to create a capacity, an awareness, a vision, and a structure that allows them to do that. Now, this is what we came out as the proposal. We came out is that actually it probably is the most important first course any student should have. Uh, uh, and what it should be composed of, we proposed is the following. First, there has to be an understanding that we are dealing with a diverse world that is filled with different understandings of peace itself and different successes in practicing peace. We actually, in that case, proposed to use a website that's called the Peaceful Society website, which is a wonderful example of peaceful societies that have existed, that do exist. That we're not only talking about some strange groups up in the desert or the mountains, but we're talking about groups such as the Amish in Pennsylvania. Societies that have peace or the search for peace at their core and can serve as examples of different understandings, not only what they're doing, but how they understand peace and how they understand they're achieving them. Once that is done, we also feel that students have to be broken out of a sort of an assumption that their way of life is the way of life, and be exposed to the fact that, in fact, not only is there a diversity, but that there is a process of cultural change that humanity has gone through repeatedly, and major cultural changes. And so there are lots of examples. The European Union, made up of warring parties, is just one example. An interesting example is how the Iroquois nation became a nation. And put together a whole new structure in order to establish what they called the Great Peace by having a balance of power that may well have affected the U.S. Constitution itself, an example of transformations. Groups like in the Pacific who changed, studied by various anthropologists like the Manus by Margaret Mead. Giving these examples that transformation to achieve peace is possible. And of course, almost all virtually religious leaders that are examples of how individuals with teachings in which community, peace, and harmony at the core have been major agents of social transformation. Then we want to bring it down to the present because that's all historic. So the idea was to look at international development, and that's why we do have a whole series on the experiences of international development to see, in terms of real lessons from people recently and which are still in practice and people still want to apply, what are the lessons in terms of whether we're working for peace and cultural transformation or not? What works, what doesn't work? And the purpose of all of these now is not to learn them as just information, but to use each of them as a basis for the students to reflect on their own thinking. And this is really critical. It's not to just know that being Amish, you think differently, but to make them reflect on, why do I think that way or not think that way? What would have to change in my own way of thinking in order for me to better understand that? And then that is the purpose of that is then to help them take on as a project finding what could be their own pathways to peace in their area of studies. So whether they're going to chemistry or political science or some independent study, to help them find within what they wish to be, what is the peace path. And that includes even people who are going into the military. What is the peace path of the military rather than the war path of the military. Now, to do that, what we really wanted to do was create a series of exchanges, again, between real people who have tried to do that and in their lives. And so we decided to take 4 individuals. Now, there are some individuals that tend to come to the surface: Gandhi, Martin Luther King. But in fact, those individuals were powerful voices for peace, but what they really were focusing on was nonviolent confrontation in terms of justice and injustice. Somewhat different from what we're talking about, which is actually creating peace. So the 4 individuals, what we decided because we felt their lives, their teachings, and also the availability of material, and in 3 cases, the availability on videos of these people themselves, was a way they could actually be present in the course. And those 4 people were Margaret Mead, a famous anthropologist who believed that the reason you studied culture is because every culture was an expression of human potential, and told us what we could do. And she did it in books such as New Lives for Old, World Enough, showing us what can be done, because she felt it had to be done if the world was to survive. We then study W. Edward Deming, so, the father of sort of value manufacturing, who basically helped the Japanese redo their entire industrial system, but who actually did it with what he called a system of profound knowledge and 14 steps of transformation, and demonstrated how you actually can transform organizations. But from that there was a larger idea that you can use this to transform any institution. And so we use him and dialogues with him. Now, this very idea of dialoguing that begins with really understanding the other and understanding why our own minds can or cannot understand the other, or can and cannot change, comes from particularly the work of David Bohm, famous physicist, but who then got involved in work on dialogue precisely because he had 2 friends, Niels Bohr and Albert Einstein, who stopped talking to each other because they disagreed on certain principles of physics. And it actually shocked him that two such great thinkers reached a point where they couldn't actually dialogue with each other. And therefore, he realized that dialogue was really where things had to begin. And so we have David Bohm as the other person, dialogue, and it was dialogue for peace. He did a great deal of work with Krishnamurti in that regard. And then the 4th person we have is Immanuel Kant, and we particularly choose Immanuel Kant because of a work of his. He's such an influential person, but his most powerful work, Perpetual Peace, in which he makes clear that along with all the pragmatics, you have to have foundational principles. And he identifies the one he thinks is most important: global hospitality. But it therefore is a challenge to the students to think what would their foundational principles be. Having done that, we would then have them seek real mentors or partners in each of their fields, and we would who would work with them, and then turn these ideas into action. And for our purposes at the University of Maryland, the 2 action arenas were something called Maryland Day, which is a big event for the outside world in which we have sort of a peace tent and program, and particularly their participation in the program Pathways to Peace, which is available on another video, and have each of the students be responsible for creating a new Pathways to Peace as their assignment, as what their real objective was in the end. And once doing that, what we would ask is for them to have a final reflection whether the methodology itself, the class itself, was a peaceful society. Because everything we do in some way can be seen as a microcosm of a peaceful society. And it's important to ask that, and it's important to ask that at the beginning. Because if you want to walk a path of peace, you have to start on a path of peace in a peaceful way with a peaceful objective. And that's why we've been trying to put together a model of how one could do that for anybody, not only people who particularly wanted to be scholars or advocates of peace, as their major focus.